let's get going on the thing. So there's obviously, as I say, there's the little intro which you'll see. That's just the front page of the thing, which is just about Kurt Vonnegut. So do please have a look at that. But in terms of getting into storytelling, I mean, one of the things I feel is sort of useful for everybody to have a sense of is that, so if we go to slide 2, James, is that everyone knows how to tell a story, right? Storytelling is part of human nature. It's part of how human beings have always communicated. It's the way in which we learn to keep ourselves safe, the way we learn to, hunt for food or find food that was edible from the beginnings of time. So we already know how to tell stories, and we automatically begin to structure them in a particular way. So, obviously this is something that you can go away and do after the session fairly straightforwardly. Obviously the last year has been quite handy in terms of this exercise, thinking about how you have changed within yourself rather than just the circumstantial things, which obviously are going to go hand in hand with it, but how you might have changed within yourself over the last 8 months. I think all of us have gone through some fairly profound changes over this period of time, and it's thinking about what that, like identifying what that might be and incorporating some of how that might feel. And what you'll find is when you put that down, you will go straight away to describing what your scenario was at the beginning of your story. You'll introduce how your situation was, what your mindset was, what your activities were, what your day-to-day looks like. And then even if you just skip straight through to the end, because we know what the middle crisis bit has been, the apocalypse, and then you skip right through to now, then we'd see in sharp juxtaposition what the difference is, and that is going to be where we understand what the significant change is. And that's, in its simplest form, that's what we're thinking about translating onto screen or into our scripts, is showing that juxtaposition in a meaningful way. So if we go on to the third slide, please, James. So obviously we all know the, beginning, middle and end, 3-act structure, blah, blah, blah. Everyone knows, that's the sort of foundational things that get referenced in terms of any storytelling. But it's important to think about what the substance of those beginning, middle and end bits are, because, and I just wanted to just take a moment as well to just say what these images are from. My presentations always have images from things that I get very enthusiastic about, because it helps me to hopefully impart some of my enthusiasm to you. So I always use this one because it's the film that radicalized me when I was at uni. I hadn't seen any foreign language films. Well, I'd seen one foreign language film before I started uni, and then I saw The Bicycle Thieves, which is where these images are from, which is an extraordinary film from Italy, just after the Second World War, and it's got probably one of the most simple plots that a film could have. The guy that you see, the adult in the images, is a guy called Ricci, and after the Second World War, him and his family are living in poverty, and he has an opportunity to get a job, but he needs a bicycle in order to do that, and they've already pawned the bicycle in order to get money for food and to pay the rent, so they have to then pawn their bed sheets in order to get the bike back so that he can do this job, and jobs are very scarce. And on the first day on the job, his bike gets nicked, and then he and his son spend the rest of the film looking for the bike. So it's as simple as you can possibly imagine it in terms of actually the plot. What it allows us to do, of course, is to see post-war Rome on multiple levels. So you get an insight into the obviously the economic situation, but also the religious situations. There's some stuff about superstition in there, a lot of things to do with class, prejudice, loads of different layers of things, as well as criminality. And crucially, the main core of the story and the main heart of it is how the relationship between he and his little boy develops, which is, you know, really what the piece is kind of having as a sort of through line, if you like, to keep the emotional engagement with the audience. So in that beginning section, what happens is we're introduced to the main character, the world of the story, and a sense of what the stakes are. So, you know, the kind of possible consequences or risks or challenges, like what could be compromised, what could cause danger, what could make this worse for them, and what do we kind of want for them to succeed in. So that when you think about stakes, obviously you'll have heard these notions of high stakes and low stakes, and it's essentially what's at risk. You know, low stakes is, you know, is something like, I don't know, you might be skipping lunch, big deal. High stakes is, you know, obviously loss of life, loss of relationship, loss of a job, those sorts of things. But it's getting a sense of sort of, okay, well, we know that, you know, this guy is living in poverty. They've already gone through this compromising situation of having to pawn the bike in order to pay the rent and eat. We like this family. We see that they are, you know, sweet together, and we're rooting for them. We get the sense that Ricci is sort of a little bit naive and a bit, you know, idealistic in his views, and thinks, right, that's going to solve everything. So we're introduced to the characters in that way. By the end of it, I won't sort of give you all of the intensity of how that relationship works out, but there's a sort of exchange of places, let's say, between him and his little boy in terms of maturity and understanding about the world. And so we have a direct flip in terms of that character journey, where he goes from being quite idealistic to being fully jaded by the end of the film. And it's through the challenges that they experience in that middle section, which in any story is going to be the longest section of the film, that reveals to the audience the layers of the personality. We're essentially stripping away the different facets of a character through that middle. So what's important to think about, if we go to the third, to the next slide, is what that change is and what we then understand about it. And it is through juxtaposition, always in film, that we get a sense of change. And what that change does, of course, is it delivers what your intention is. Why are you telling this story? What are you trying to say with it? Another really important thing to think about with any storytelling is that it is a dialogue. It is a conversation with an audience. The whole point of the story is to communicate something, and film is the most powerful form of communication that human beings have invented. So we kind of better be saying something. And it's interesting to hear you talk about, those of you that have been looking at lots of short films and other scripts and things. I know when I was setting up the festival, which I, by the way, don't work on anymore, but when I was running it, you know, we were watching a couple of hundred short films a year easily, and one of the things that used to sort of upset me about it was not the ones where you'd get kind of like really shonky equipment and, you know, slightly acting, or the sound was off, because you just think, well, that's just stuff, you know, that's just resources, that's what people have got available to them, that can be fixed. The ones that really used to upset me were the ones where they had, you know, beautiful production, the, you know, design of everything was sort of pretty flawless, but you'd get to the end of it and you'd be like, and that just made me sad, because it was like, well, you've got all of the resources, you've got the facility to tell a really powerful story here, but you're not really delivering on something that's sticking with me or making me, you know, change my perception about, you know, I don't even know what you're trying to kind of do here, apart from demonstrate that you're skilled at cinematography, or do you know what I mean? It was frustrating, because you just felt like, well, I want to get a sense of what you're trying to communicate. So hopefully these examples are all super familiar to you. They're all very famous films, and there are lots of changes that occur in each of these films, but you can see, even just with the juxtaposition of images, the color palettes, how different they are. You know, the actual construction of the images is so different from beginning to end. The facial expressions, the postures, all of those sorts of things are very different in each one. And the change in these films is the way in which we understand what that film is about. It's how we get the essence of the film. So knowing what it is that you want to say is going to then be the foundational point of how you structure your story, because we understand what you want to say by the way in which the story ends. And it's important to think then, if we're communicating to an audience, how do you want your audience to feel at the end of the film? What information do you want them to have? How do you want their perceptions to have changed? And that emotional journey of the audience is ultimately going to be the basis for your structure. It's important to remember that the way that you know, protagonists work, main characters work, is that the audience will essentially imprint on them. The main character becomes like a cipher for them, or like an avatar for them. And so, you know, when it's done effectively, what you find is that the audience will feel the same thing that the protagonist feels. So the protagonist is frightened, audience are frightened. The protagonist is angry, we're angry. They're happy, we're happy. So we experience the world of the film through that protagonist experience. And having a sense of what the emotional shifts in the character are going to be is going to then dictate what the audience's journey through that film is going to be, which is why we must have this variety that I referred to in the opening slide of Kurt Vonnegut's Shape of Stories, which, as I say, I highly recommend. Just, it's only like 5 minutes, but having a look at on YouTube. So going to the next slide about points of view, and then when we're choosing our stories, because we're thinking we have you know, by this point, hopefully we've got a clear sense of what it is that we want to communicate and what we want the audience to understand from us telling this story, why we're telling it in the first place, is then deciding what point of view is most effective for that. Because as we know, you know, everyone's going to have a different perspective and different values within that story world, and that is going to massively impact how the audience interpret the information and what is going to be the outcome of them hearing that message. We know that, you know, for a good character being, you know, being the protagonist, it's going to come out with one sense of understanding. And for the, you know, the antagonist, if we tell it from their point of view, then actually it might be that you're delivering something that feels completely immoral, but you're getting an understanding of what their psyche is and why they would behave in such, you know, unpleasant ways, because we're getting into the intentions of them underneath all of that. So again, tied very closely to this sense of what you want your audience to feel and how you may want them to rethink their perceptions according to how you structure that piece. The image I've used here, I don't know if any of you know this film, but again, I would highly recommend a watch of it, if nothing else for the fact that as a screenplay, it's audacious. Actually, it does something which I've never seen executed with the skill in which it is here. It's a film called Mudbound, and it's on Netflix. I would say if you go ahead and watch it, one of the things I would say is probably don't watch it on your own, because it's really hard. It's really hard film, and certainly when I watched it, I was with a friend and we were both literally shaking and sobbing at the end. It's really intense, and incredibly effective about how it communicates the a story that we kind of think we all know about segregation and about racial prejudice and violence, but it communicates it in a way that I've never seen done as effectively, and it makes it more personal, and more terrifying and visceral than I've seen before. And the main way it does that is of course through its structure. So it's got at its heart how Dee Rees, the writer-director, wants the audience to receive this information, and she's incredibly clever about how she understands the uses of flashback and voiceover to distance the audience at the beginning and put them in a position of, essentially in a position of white privilege, really, a position of arrogance and of, oh yes, I know this situation, oh yes, I've heard these stories before, which, so flashback and voiceover will have that distancing effect. They will bring your audience away from the emotional core, because every time you use a flashback or you introduce a voiceover, you're disrupting the audience engagement with the real world that you've been working to immerse them in. You're reminding them this is false, this is, you know, this is something, you know, that you're not a part of, this is a story, and you break that engagement, and then you're asking them to still remain emotionally engaged with the point at which you break them, and you start over again in a completely different location, and then when you flash back they still have to care about that one. So you're dispersing their connection to those different points of view every time you do it, which is what Dee Rees does again and again in the opening of Mudbound. And it, as I say, it has this incredibly distancing effect. So you can kind of almost be sitting back going, oh yeah, I know about all this. Oh yeah, I've seen all this. And by the end of it, she rips your heart out. So it's incredibly powerful because she understands how those devices work. And certainly in short film, it's quite a risky thing to employ flashback and voiceover for exactly that reason. It's not to say it can't be done, it's just that you need to have an awareness of how it works.
Is the script available?
Yeah, the Mudbound script is available. Yeah, it's
Okay.
if you just, yeah, I mean, I've got it, and I can send that to James now actually, so that he can send that on to you.
It's a short as well, is it?
No, it's not. No, it is a feature film. It is a feature film. It's on Netflix. But yeah, I'll do that. I'll send James
Gabriella,
the script. Yes.
Is what you're talking about? I was literally reading this yesterday. It's something in relation to stand-up Stuart Lee. Is this what people refer to when they talk about Brechtian alienation?
I have no idea.
Oh, okay. I thought that would be right up your street. I was trying to understand it yesterday, like the distancing effect or something like that.
It might. I mean, yeah, it might. You know, it may well be. To be honest, there's so many. There are so many different terms that get used in storytelling kind of guidelines, if you like, or lessons, textbooks, whatever. And to be honest with you, I think they become prohibitive in terms of our actual practical engagement with these things, because yeah, if those terms are useful to you, by all means go for it, use them. But I think, you know, there is, I've found anyway, in the various, you know, things I've read or you know, seminars or lectures or whatever that I've been to, that you can get very, very bogged down in the terminology, and ultimately what matters is how, you know, is how powerful the script is. It doesn't really matter. Do you know what I mean? The good thing with screenplay and with any storytelling is it's not a science, it's not maths. Do you know what I mean? You can't like get it right and then get it wrong. It's just a whole subjective world of difference. And the lovely thing with film is that of course you can do anything. What we're looking for is for it to have an impact on the audience. That's always the point of reference. Is and you know, from my side of it, as you know, whatever work I've done with this, something is entirely evaluated on the basis of how it moves you as a reader or as an audience member, and that, you know, ultimately that's how we're communicating, you know, how the communication, how the dialogue between storyteller and audience works. Has that audience member sat in their seat for the duration of the film, and have they then enjoyed it enough to tell somebody else about it, so that person goes to see it as well? I mean, that's literally how the business works. So you know, it's yeah, there are loads and loads and loads of different bits of jargon. I tend to avoid them as much as I possibly can because I don't find them very helpful. But yeah, maybe yeah, that may well be what it is. Brechtian sounds good, doesn't it? Brechtian, what was it?
Brechtian alienation.
Yeah, it sounds good. Yeah, I just feel like if I say that to my students, they're going to go,
Well, that's how I've reacted every time anyone said it.
Exactly, and like I need them to, like, you know, when you're trying to sort of like demystify stuff, do you know what I mean? And it's like, you know, you want to you know, stop, not use terrifying terms like that make it sound inaccessible. So yeah, so one of the things about, you know, about Mudbound, about this thing of choosing points of view, is that it might be that sometimes you are choosing, let's say, you know, the immoral or the antagonist point of view, and that might actually prove to be really effective in terms of the audience understanding of, you know, what the journey is that you're describing, and may be much more compelling than, you know, the conventional hero point of view or heroine point of view. So that, you know, you've got something a bit more complex going on. We might see different environments through an antagonist's point of view, or like the traditional antagonist's point of view, than we would if we were going to be going through the hero heroine point of view, because we might see, you know, more dangerous environments or more unknown environments in terms of, you know, what a conventional audience members, you know, access to the world is. So thinking about how that change occurs and how that perspective can shine a different light onto a story and draw out a different meaning to it as well can be quite useful. And it's important to keep in mind that whatever story you're telling, of course, it's all a construction. It's all made up. You don't have to tell it the one way, you know, and it's about playing with that idea and thinking, well, what happens to this story if I do choose to have a different entry point? How does that affect it? Does that, you know, convey a different intention or a different meaning, or does it deliver the intention I want more powerfully? But it always comes back to this sense of what it is you want to communicate, and then communicating that as clearly and powerfully as possible to the audience. Okay, so if we go on to the next slide, and then thinking about how we begin to do that, which is always through a point of empathy, compassion and truth for what those characters are feeling. So what we essentially have to do is there's a wonderful writer, Tony Grissoni, who often works with Terry Gilliam, and he was being interviewed here actually a couple of years ago, just at the Quarterhouse, and the interviewer asked him about method writing, which I really liked how he talked about that, in the sense that you've almost got to get under the skin of your characters and begin to put yourself in their place in the same way that an actor might, and get to that connection with how that situation, how that scene might feel to that character, and let that be the overriding principle through which you construct that scene. So that, you know, as in real life, we know that the feeling comes before anything else, right? The feeling comes before you say something or before you do something. And it's the same for your characters. They feel something first and then they act. So what they say and what they do might change, but if you know what the underlying emotion is beneath that, then you're working to convey the truth of that emotion rather than to explain it, let's say, through a superficial gesture or superficial dialogue. Remembering, of course, that dialogue is not there to convey information. Dialogue is there to convey emotion and character. The visuals are there to convey information. So hopefully some of these images are familiar to you, and they happen at different points within the film, but interestingly, especially from a structure point of view, they're quite significant in where they happen. So you can see the ending of Casablanca and Rocky. You can see I've got some of my favourite films. And both, you know, very heavy with emotion, and, you know, conveying the depth of conflict that's gone on for both of those characters through those scenes, that encapsulates essentially the rawness of what, you know, they want, what the filmmaker is wanting to leave the audience with. You know, we've got the, you know, Ingrid Bergman's character, that sense of, hang on, what's happening? I didn't know if I want to go with the other guy. I thought I was going to be with you. And very famously, the director didn't actually tell her who she'd be going with at that moment, so that they could get that genuine look of kind of, you know, bewilderment, which I think, to be fair, Ingrid Bergman could have emoted without needing to pull a trick on her, but, you know. Anyway, and also then, of course, with Rocky, we've got, you know, it is the point that he has lost the fight, but he's, you know, the raw passion and the calling for his partner is there, that kind of prioritizing of what's important to him, and the moment of realization. They're both at the end of the film, you know, that are both very emotional endings. With the image in the center, which is from Selma, that's from right at the beginning of the film. Wonderful film about Martin Luther King, and this moment there, that's a very small gesture, which is Martin Luther King's wife helping him tie his tie before he goes out to collect the Nobel Peace Prize. It's a moment where we understand that, you know, we've just got a normal, regular guy here who's super nervous about going on stage, and he's like fumbling with what he's wearing, and he's not sure about it. And the whole perspective that Ava DuVernay takes on her characterization of Martin Luther King is not to deify him, it's not to put him onto this inaccessible pedestal, it's to depict him as a real human being who achieved so much with what he was able to do, which in a way it makes him even more remarkable, and increases the audience's connection to him, because he's not, you know, as I say, this inaccessible saint. He's somebody who feels nervous like the rest of us do, who's flawed like we all are, and yet look at what he did. So it's by humanizing him, and by you know, giving these little intimate behind the scenes moments, we actually get a greater connection to the extraordinary achievements that he made, and those little moments of vulnerability and flaws are really important to our understanding of, as I say, certainly from a starting point of what world we're going into, and who are the people here, what are going to be their challenges, and how those unfold throughout the middle of the film are going to be based on just stripping away layer after layer, and getting really, as I say, to the truth of the character. Because we know, I mean, certainly I think pretty much all of us have experienced this within the last year, if we hadn't before, that, you know, it's when times are hard that you see the truth of somebody, or you realise the truth in yourself, you know. And so we must have challenges in films. That's the purpose of the challenges in films. That's what any of those points of conflict are doing to us. Oh, I'm one of those old-fashioned people that has a landline. Okay, good, it's rung off. so yeah, so that's ultimately what challenges and conflicts throughout your middle section of your film are there to do. They're not just there to move the plot forward. Their fundamental principle is actually to reveal the different layers of character, and to keep in mind that once you've revealed an aspect of a character, you don't need to do it again. We've got that. It's there. A lot of the time there's this thing of repetition all the way through, and people go, oh, well, I want to show this side of the character. That's just how they are. And once you've revealed that to us, you don't need to keep revealing it. You're adding on top. So we know that bit, but then give us something else, and give us something else, and add to it all the time. So there's a forward momentum with the way in which we're engaging with the character, that we're learning something new with each event that happens. And we're not at a point of you know, getting static. Once we start to get static through repetition, that's when you'll begin to lose the connection with the audience, because it's like, oh, well, I already know this. So for example, if somebody is really anal about, you know, keeping everything tight, super tidy in their flat, then okay, that's fine, we see that. But then the next time that we see that, you need to add something more complex into it. So for example, I mean, old film, but Sleeping with the Enemy, you know, we see that the guy's super funny about, you know, how the towels are, and how the cans have to be pointing a certain way in the cupboard, but those exact same things become something else. They become something sinister, and then they become something threatening. So it's about how that develops in terms of the audience understanding the significance of those things. Does that make sense for everybody? Yeah. Okay, good. Nodding heads, hooray. So yeah, and then we've got this image, Carol, with the hand on the shoulder. And actually this moment features, because it's a circular narrative, we come back to this point, which is also one of the, you know, very early scenes in the film. And the significance of this tiny gesture, tiny innocuous gesture of a hand on the shoulder, which we don't necessarily regard as something particularly significant the first time that we see it. But because we go on this circular narrative and we come around to understanding the relationship between these two women and return to that same gesture at the end, it has a totally different impact on the audience understanding when we see it again. And again, it's the value of juxtaposition when we have the insight into, you know, what these intentions are. And so something which feels incredibly innocuous at the beginning has an enormous amount of significance at the end, and a huge emotional punch to it, because of how it fits in to the circumstances and to our understanding of what's beneath that gesture. So when we're thinking about as I say, the structure of things, it's important to remember about how much information your audience has got at different points in the film, because something that might not look that compelling at first sight, actually, if we understand what's going on beneath it, can be incredibly profound. So remember, your audience doesn't have all of the information that you've got, because you know the whole story, but you get to decide how much information they have according to how you want them to feel. The intention of Todd Haynes with Carol is absolutely to make this gesture look innocuous at the beginning, and it's absolutely to make us feel that gut-wrenching, you know, heartbreak when we see it again. So it's being very careful about how you want the audience to respond at different points in your film. The picture down at the bottom, which is of the two fingers touching, you may recognise the Silence of the Lambs. It's the only moment at which Hannibal Lecter and Clarice have a bit of physical contact in the film. And the wonderful thing, the reason I put that in there is just for, more than anything, the fact that when I saw that I had the good fortune to see Silence of the Lambs on the big screen, and if you ever do get the opportunity ever again to go to a cinema and see Silence of the Lambs on the big screen, I highly recommend it, because it was like watching it. It was kind of like watching it for the first time. And if you've seen the film, you will know that at that one moment where, you know, this cannibal who eats people, you know, actually makes physical contact with the young FBI agent, it sends a shiver through you. And it literally, in a cinema, when that happened, you could feel everyone going at the same time, which is lovely. And it's this wonderful thing that film allows us to do, which is to put the camera at the thing that's a bit, you know, that's going to be visceral, and goes, look at that, that's horrible. And it forces you to then respond to it. You know, you're controlling, by putting on the page the bits that are important of the jigsaw puzzle. You're essentially taking their eyes and going, look at this, you need this bit, this is important. And you know, with that, the camera is zooming in on that tiny gesture to go, gross, so that we can all go, oh yeah, and respond to it in the way that Clarice does, like, oh my God, he just touched me, you know, so, which overcomes any of the sense of respect or compassion she had built up for him. No, this guy could still eat you. There. So it's, you know, this very visceral response that they're driving at. So going down to the next slide, then, thinking about how impactful visual storytelling is, and where I've said about that the information in a film is through the images. It's not in the dialogue. If you find yourself writing information or explanation in the dialogue, then you need to go back to thinking of what it is you've put on screen and what it is that those things are telling the audience. You've got all of these wonderful filmmaking components at your disposal to do with, obviously, lighting, costume, production design, behavior, gesture, you know, all of the, you know, color palettes, you know, an incredible amount of technology there. And that's where information is coming from. And that's how the audience are going to understand the world of your film. You can see tonally the extreme difference between these two images. The top one is from Marnie, which happens to be my favourite Hitchcock film, apart from the last 30 seconds. And the other image is from a film called Obvious Child, which is known as the abortion rom-com, and it is hilarious, actually, so I would recommend it. But you can see, hopefully, through both of those images, what the tonal difference is in those scenes, and how they've been constructed very, very deliberately. Remember, nothing, as I said on the slide, nothing's on screen by accident. And whilst you will undoubtedly hear directors that will tell you, oh yeah, we just got so lucky and this just happened, and so we decided to include it. It's not there by accident. If it's in the final cut, if it's in the edit, it's there on purpose, and it's got an intention and meaning behind it. And it is a construction. It is there as a manipulation to create engagement between the audience and the film. So when we're thinking of how we then build that sense of information on screen, it is making full use of obviously all of the props, all of the filmmaking elements that we're talking about, and also how those things actually unfold. It's particularly challenging if you're in like a fantasy world or a sci-fi world, that we need to actually see how these things function. So, for example, in, you know, no end of sci-fi films, you will see someone push a button and then something will happen. So, like, push a button and an alien materializes. You push a button again, it will disappear. It's like, oh, okay, that's what that button does. We don't need to say, this is the button that makes the alien appear. Look, do you know what I mean? You just do it and just let us see it. Do you know what I mean? So then we actually get a sense of it. So, I mean, a really good example of this is Back to the Future. And in the very, very early drafts of Back to the Future, it was just I managed to find it, an early draft of it on wonderful website called Simply Scripts, which I can put in the chat in case you want to look at it. So everyone, so it's just called simplyscripts.com, and it's kind of like a sort of database, I suppose, of screenplays. But there's thousands of them online. Scripts, thankfully, are very easy. English language scripts are very easily available online. You can pretty much type in the title of the film and put screenplay.
Gabriella,
yeah.
Sorry, can I ask you something? I usually feel these scripts sometimes are a transcript rather than the original screenplay. I never know.
Yeah.
What, are they a transcript? They're not the original
No,
script.
no. You're looking for the actual script. So if you put in screenplay PDF, then you should come up with the script. And Simply Scripts has got certainly, they tend to have like different drafts of them. So as I say, like the Back to the Future one that I managed to get hold of, when you've got that literal explanation of time travel, it's extraordinary because nothing moves. You've got Doc with his dog Einstein in his garage explaining time travel to Marty for several pages, and then there's a random bit with some Coca-Cola involved. I don't understand why that is, but then and then the time travel bit happens. But it's like the screenwriter was trying to explain time travel in the dialogue, and you're like, mate, that's not your job. You don't have to have figured that bit out because we know that's pretend. That's okay. You don't have to solve that in order to write the script. All we really want is for it to happen so that we can be back in the 50s with Marty and all the drama and comedy with his parents. So obviously then it's like, okay, we need to turn this visual. We have a fast car, we have plutonium, and we have a little dial thing that says the date, and then the car goes super fast, bit of flame, hooray, we understand, like, yep, that would work, yep, that would happen. So we don't need it to be real, but we do need to be able to buy into it through that visual storytelling. If it's just explained to us, it gives the audience the opportunity to just go, yeah, right, that's just not real though, is it? It doesn't sound authentic, it doesn't sound believable, there's too many holes in it. Whereas if we see it happen, we can just go, yeah, okay, I'm happy to go with that. So remember, your audience will go pretty much anywhere with you, but you've got to make that easy for them by the way in which you deliver information through the visuals. And as I say, it's got to be that as a priority above the dialogue. Oh, James has got a nice story about Back to the Future. Tell us, James. Is he there? He's just messaged me and told me he's got a nice story about Back to the Future. Is he there? Is he there? Oh, he's gone.
Sorry,
again.
I'm here.
Oh no, you're there. You're there. Hello.
I've only been using Zoom for 7 months, and I still sometimes forget to take myself off mute.
Fair enough. We all do.
Yeah. So Back to the Future, it actually leads on to our next networking development session in 2 weeks about feedback and actors round tables. So Steven Spielberg was the producer on Back to the Future, one of the producers. And they got some feedback from one of the kind of exec producers on the film saying, this is I think it should be more out there. It should be more about the aliens from outer space. And, and you should call it Pluto from outer space. And they all flummoxed in the office. What should we do? What do we do? This is a powerful kind of exec producer. And they just came up with this wonderful idea to write him a letter saying, thank you so much for your feedback. It was such an amazing joke. It made the office laugh. Thank you so much. And then they never heard from him again.
Hey.
Sometimes the best one for is writing silly letters back to people.
Yeah, great.
There you go. I'll let you get back to it.
Thank you. So then thinking about the specificity, which I hate that word because I have a lisp and it's difficult for me to say, but getting really clear about what it is that you're putting on screen and why you're putting it there. And keeping in mind that the way in which something happens has to be unique to your story in order to get across what it is that you're trying to convey. So if we go to the next slide, this is an exercise I've done a couple of times this year, or recently anyway. And it's useful for the fact of, again, if you want to take this away, do it in your own time. It's useful when you're thinking about how to convey a particular emotion and how those come across in different ways. The images I've got here of 3 examples of films that demonstrate a character getting angry, and we can think of anger in people shout and they swear, maybe they break stuff or whatever, maybe they cry. Oh, back please, thank you. So the 3 images we've got, the one on the left is Annie Wilkes from Misery, shouty lady there, and the way that we, again, coming into the sense of what the truth of the character is and how that is revealed to us as well. She's a character who appears to be quite nice at the beginning, but when she gets angry, she gets very angry in a violent sense, and she takes a mallet to the ankles of the lead male character in the film, and tries to kill him. So she has a very extreme way of handling anger, which allows us to see her true psychopathy. Then we have the middle character, which is Tara G.P. Henson's character, Katherine Johnson, in Hidden Figures. And when she gets quite rightly angry in the film for the fact that she hasn't been able to access a bathroom because she's black, and she has to run across like for a mile from her desk to be able to go to the toilet, she expresses her anger in a way that is dignified, eloquent, just, and with a sort of grace to it, and that allows us to and a great deal of strength as well. And her anger also affects direct change. So we see a huge amount about her personality and the way in which she expresses anger. She doesn't completely lose it. She doesn't get violent. She doesn't swear. She absolutely keeps her composure, but she doesn't relinquish her strength and her factual explanation and her clear articulation of what the issue is, and actually enables somebody to understand that her reasoned anger and again affects direct change, revealing a huge amount about her character, how she really is and what the truth of her is. The final character there is Michelle Williams in a beautiful film by Kelly Reichardt called Wendy and Lucy. I'll just put that in the chat. Kelly Reichardt's amazing. Yeah, James has put some information in there. Kelly Reichardt is wonderful. Michelle Williams works with her quite a lot, and she delivers an incredible performance. And there's a moment in this film where the character quite early on has been arrested for shoplifting, and it's a very big overreaction. The way in which she's treated in this scene is hugely disproportionate to the crime, and to crucially what we understand is that why she's gone to that point of shoplifting. And so our compassion is very much with the character, and we see her in the cell when she's just waiting, completely still, not verbalizing anything, but you can almost feel the fury raging from her. And we understand this, this depiction of anger is again very much in line with who she is as a person, which is that she just wants to be able to get on with her life. She doesn't want conflict. She's got wants to just sort of like step out of conventional society and make her own way without making a fuss. And so there's that's depicted through her physical manifestation of that fury, which is sort of repressed and internalized. So as an example of sort of just generating story, thinking about what makes us angry is quite a useful starting point for the fact that we get very passionate about it, we get very engaged with it, and obviously it's really important to be writing about stuff that you care about. The other thing with thinking about what makes us angry is that invariably, if we know what that is, then we know what would fix it. So you straight away have your beginning and an end, right? And you can put them either way round, it doesn't matter, but you've got essentially a resolution there as well as a starting point, and it can, you know, allow you to begin, you know, to build that framework of juxtaposition. Then thinking about a character's emotional journey through, you know, that scenario of being made angry and resolving it, or being in the position of neutrality and then something, you know, the drama happening in the making of the anger making thing, what that then affects in terms of how that changes the character's life, is also useful, because you've got, as I say, this emotional complexity to unpacking what the reasons for the anger are, what that's based on, and how that impacts on the other people around them, and what those scenes might need to be in order to depict that. So it can be quite a useful starting point if you're just kind of throwing around ideas. And of course, because you're thinking about short film, you know, it's then thinking what locations we can get access to fairly straightforwardly, what's, you know, available to us just immediately at our fingertips. Hopefully you've all heard about the ridiculous achievement of the wonderful, lovely Rob Savage over lockdown. Rob Savage is a horror director who has made a film entirely over Zoom during lockdown. It's called Host. It's showing on a platform called Shudder, which you can get through Amazon Prime. And off the back of this, he's just signed a 3-picture deal with Blumhouse. He's doing a movie with Studio Canal about a haunting in a women's prison, and he's got a film being produced by Sam Raimi. So he's doing very, 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 very well. And he's a wonderful, wonderful guy. But he, yeah, with his mates, literally over lockdown, they were like, okay, what do we do? And they, I mean, without even stepping foot in the actors' homes, he managed to make this pretty terrifying film over Zoom. Extraordinary achievement. So it's thinking, what have we got available to us, and how can we turn that to our advantage, and what, you know, what the potential is for those, you know, how do we turn the kind of the sorry, James sent me a message. So yeah, it's then thinking about how do we turn what might be a disadvantage into an advantage. And then crucially, how do you want the audience to feel through that journey of watching this? Do you want the audience to feel on the side of, you know, where that anger is coming from, or do you want them to respond, you know, in the oppositional way to it? So therefore, how does that affect whose perspective you tell that story from? So, for example, the one I was telling, you know, my silly example that I was telling my students just last week was tourists getting on the tube at rush hour. Why do they do that? And, you know, and how might I fix that? I would pass a regulation that said no tourists are allowed on the tube before 10 a.m. That would be it. So it's like, okay, well, how, you know, whose story do we tell here? Do we tell the story of me, or do we tell the story of somebody who's been desperate to come to London for their whole entire life, and they must get to Madame Tussauds before opening time, and they've got all their, you know, millions of children ready in time, and then they're thwarted by this horrendous new law that I've passed, you know? So like thinking about how that might affect different scenarios, and, you know, potential comedy scenarios that might come out of that, or is it going to turn into a horror film, blah, blah, blah. James has said about giving you a break. I'm not going to do that just for the fact that we are sort of nearing the end of the presentation. So if you bear with me, and we'll get to the next slide, and we'll just get to the end of the presentation, and then if you wanted to have a little break before we chat about you can just sort of ask me stuff at the end if you like. This is just a really quick demonstration of about tone and thinking about genre. Now, this is of course much more relevant when you get into feature writing than it would be in short film, but it's still worth thinking about, in the sense that when something's being sold or packaged around the globe, and this is part of the problem that, you know, if you've been reading about what's going on with the cinema industry, you know, because of the pandemic, then, you know, one of the issues is because of very heavily marketed genre-based, big budget mainstream films, and that sense that the cinemas need to, they've only got an audience that will go and see specific stuff. They haven't necessarily been distributing the much more independent or unusual types of content. The audiences therefore have got used to only going to cinema for a certain type of film, and so then when something like James Bond is being put back, it affects how possible it is for a cinema to get in an audience to see the smaller films like, I don't know, Saint Maud, or for example, that's just recently come out. And so, you know, distributors traditionally have packaged films into very specific marketing strategy, and you can see all I've done here is literally type in horror movie posters, sci-fi movie posters, comedy movie posters into Google, and you can see hopefully very clearly what the similarities are in how these things are packaged, so that no matter how nuanced your film might be, it's going to get reduced down to a poster. And it's going to get reduced down to, oh, it's that genre. And it's in the same way that when we're looking at on Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever, streaming things for a certain type of film, oh, I'm in the mood for a comedy, oh, I'm in the mood for, you know, a horror. And then you start watching it. If it's not that, you're kind of like, oh, it's not what I ordered, it's not what I wanted. You know, it's like going into an Italian restaurant and then you get given a menu for Chinese food and you're like, huh? I mean, I like Chinese food, I just don't want it tonight. You know, it's just, it's keeping it up with what the audience expectation is, and delivering on that. So next slide, please. And yeah, ultimately, you know, the main thing to remember is that there isn't, as same thing with the jargon, it isn't about knowing all of the jargon, it isn't about knowing all of the different terminology to do with turning points, to do with, I don't know, formatting, you know, the formatting jargon. You must get the formatting in the industry format, that's important, but knowing all the different bits of terminology is really redundant, and a lot of it, to be honest with you, is there to make people who class themselves as screenwriting gurus sound like they know what they're talking about, and it doesn't actually have a lot of substance to it. The main thing is that your story is good. That's it. The story has to be good, and it has to be, and when I say good, it means that it's impactful. It's telling the audience something specific. It's being very clear about what its intention is, and it's moving you. It's giving you an emotional response. So however you get there doesn't matter. You know, the main thing is you've got to finish the thing, and then you have to get into the process of rewriting it. Finishing it can be really, really difficult. That can be the first thing that's a huge challenge, and certainly Stephen King, who I would highly recommend you all look at his book on writing. He says that he does his first draft as quickly as possible to prevent the inner critic starting to kind of get involved in censoring the work. And then when you rewrite it, you're beginning to craft it and hone it and think about how the audience are going to respond to it. So the rewriting process is really essential. That's where the hard work is. I always say to people about the first draft is like, if you're a sculptor, you've got to first hack out a bit of rock from a mountain, and at the end of it you're going to be exhausted and you're just going to have an ugly bit of rock, but that's your first draft, you know. And then your second draft, your third draft is about crafting it, shaping it, and beginning to kind of get the sense of what that looks like. So the rewriting is really key to it, and structure will always play a massive part in that, because it, as I say, the structure is where you're delivering what your intention is, and that is through juxtaposition. The simplest way I can convey this to you is that if you know what you want your journey to be, then you have your character in the oppositional state to that. So let's say you want your character to be somebody who is incredibly kind, who has learned to be, to be compassionate to others, and there's somebody who is now going to go, and be very, selfless in the way that they deal with people. A very powerful way to start that story is to have them be the complete opposite of that. Have them be somebody who's soulless, who's cruel, who's, doesn't have empathy, and then take them on a journey that demonstrates why it's important to actually, think about the feelings of others. There's so many films that already do this. I mean, The Fisher King is a lovely example. The Lives of Others, German film, lovely example. So, and that's literally those stories of totally different films. One is by Terry Gilliam, Bonkers, New York. Robin Williams is in it, lots of comedy, loony film, brilliant, lovely, enjoyable. The other one, Lives of Others, is a really, really intense, phenomenal thriller set in East Germany before the wall came down. But in terms of what they're speaking to, it is that journey of somebody who's got no empathy going to being, extremely generous. And it's the challenges about, how they get there that you're going to be uncovering, which again, revealing all of the different layers of that character's psyche as you go, and crucially building all the way along. And then, so the final slide is to think about, when you've got your short film idea, that it's straightforward. There's absolutely no sense in overcomplicating things with short film. And of course there is that sort of impatience that we all have to make a masterpiece and all of that. But actually the more straightforward it is, the more impactful it's going to be. Helpful to this is, of course, understanding the form, watching a lot of short films, seeing how they do it. The image here is from a brilliant short film called Operator, which won the BAFTA a few years ago. It's on Vimeo for free, and it's impeccable. It's in 5 minutes. You go through this incredible emotional journey. The main thing that every single story must have in order to be effective, and it doesn't matter where it comes from, but it must have a change. That's the only non-negotiable thing in any story that you're working with. So, when we're thinking about structure, it's thinking about the changes. That's the crucial thing. Is, the changes must happen on screen in order for them to happen within the audience. And if we don't have change, then we have this sort of static and passive viewer relationship where they're just not going to engage. So the more changes there can possibly be on screen, and the more points of conflict, the closer we're going to get to the truth of that character, the more we're going to care about the story. So you have your very clear opening, we know what the principles are, we have the very clear ending, we know what your intention is, and the middle section is about delivering those different layers of importance for the audience to connect to how we're going to get from one extreme to the other. So that's it. That's me. Done.
I just wanted to, Gabriella, ask you a couple of questions just before we take any other questions anybody has. Yeah, are there any other short films that you would really recommend for people to have a look at, which are a good example of structure? The other ones you have in mind, and then I'll look them up and put them in the chat. So don't worry about
great.
doing that.
So there's a brilliant one which the last year that I was involved with Underwire that we had, and I bless them, they were so sweet because it actually came through after the deadline, and they were like, don't come in after the deadline. But then we all watched it, all of us on the advisory panel, and immediately we're like, oh my gosh, we have to have this film. And it went on to win the best screenplay award for that year. It's called 1745. And the women that made that, the last I heard was that they were working and beginning to get kind of financial backing for that as a feature, and that's an extraordinary short film. Another
Sure.
one that I really think is great for, you know, which goes back a little way, but it's by a wonderful woman called Deb Hayward, is her film Sis, which is SIS, which is on YouTube. So yeah, 1745 is on Vimeo. Sis is on YouTube. It's a shocker. It's like, from a child point of view, very beautifully done, very interesting film. Yeah, and Deb has a sort of lovely kind of dark way of dark but beautiful way of seeing things. So it's yeah, it's interesting subject matter. It's about, well, there's a paedophile that's moved to the area, and the child character hears about this, and she begins to become curious, and her friend decide they're going to go and find this man that they have heard likes children.
What was the title of that again?
It's called Sis, S-I-S.
SIS.
Yeah, it's on YouTube, but it's beautifully done. It's really, and it's one of those that you just sort of don't forget it after you've seen it. And then there's one that we watch a lot through at Met Film School, called Bowker, B-A-W-K-E, which is a gorgeous, very moving film about a father and son asylum seekers. That's very powerful.
Great. So, a short I didn't know that was a short, that the Oscar-winning film Whiplash was a short film beforehand.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting one now that that went on to that.
Well, that's happening more and more as well now, where you know, people are being asked to make proof of concept films. I mean, Whiplash is you know, that scene is pretty much shot for shot in the feature, but increasingly now people will ask for a proof of concept short film, which isn't necessarily, well, it actually shouldn't be an extract from the film, but it's about conveying the sort of world of your film, what the priorities are, similar themes, you know, and being able to tell a whole story in a short time frame. So rather than it just being like a scene from your film, it's actually showing that you can handle a full story that is, you know, different but similar. So for example, there's Prano Bailey Bond, who did Nasty, which is her proof of concept for her first debut feature, which is coming out next year, called Censor. And that was very definitely why she wrote Nasty. Was
yes, and Mark mentions The Silent Child.
Yeah.
Which won the which I think it
won the Oscar. Yeah,
it's British film, was on I think it's still on, I'll check if it's on still on iPlayer. It was on BBC One, which for the obviously winning an Oscar, I think they showed it just before the news, or they showed it in prime time. So,
it's a sweet film. We had
one.
that through Underwire as well, actually. It was nice
fantastic.
to see them go on to win that. Yeah.
So I'm gonna...
and Hair Love, which won the best short film this last time. Hair Love is great as well.
Oh, the animation, yes. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to throw it open to anybody who has a question for Gabriella. Anybody does?
I have a question. I wonder if this is something you could kind of advise me on. So I suppose where I'm at the moment is I really want to find collaborators. So I have some people I've worked with in the past in London, but I was really hoping to work with people in this area. So I don't know if it can be specific, but just in a kind of broader sense, how do people usually go about finding, like writer directors going about finding a producer, and B, building a small crew of people to actually make something? I feel like I can find other actors, but like that core team, I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's really hard to do. I mean, because apart from anything else, it's sort of trial and error, and there's the thing that people obviously those successful collaborations are because people sort of very much are on the same page as one another, and you often don't tend to find that out until you've done it.
God, tell me about it.
So it is a little bit of trial and error, and it can take a little while to do, and it can break your heart a few times as well along the way.
I'm a wreck.
Yeah, we all are. Don't worry about it. We all are. So it's really difficult. Unfortunately, I don't know about any kind of shortcuts in that regard. Apart from, you know, the sort of sensible things that one would do in terms of like watching that person's other work and having lots of conversations with them. But it's a getting to know you thing. And I think, you know, there's a big debate to be had about the value of film school, you know, and how necessary it is. But I think if anything, that, you know, really does allow people to solidify their core team, because they find them there, often, not always, but often, and that can be the thing that's hardest when you haven't been, is beginning to find people. I mean, it's taken me a long time to find people that, yeah, and again, you just never know as well, because until it's happened, and you might be like, hopefully not, but yeah, it's hard.
I would definitely recommend you going to short film festivals, like as and when we can in the future. The London Short Film Festival, they have some, you know, mixers there. You can go and see people's shorts, and they actually invite short film filmmakers to make a fuss of them, and then they do Q&As after. So the London Short Film Festival is in January, and hopefully, and there's I think I'm going to say it wrong, Aesthetica,
yeah, that's on at the moment, I think,
which is in New York, which is online, so you should definitely check that out. And so that's that. I mean, they're all online at the moment, so you can you know, watch people's films, approach them, and see if they align with what you're thinking of doing. So
I think for me the big red flag, Kit, is, you know, and this sort of being utterly candid, the big red flag to me, and I think which is where, especially when you're starting in, you know, in these things, and if you're anything like I was, just desperately wanted to get any opportunities going, is having a very kind of clear assessment of the people that are interested in you because you get on well with them and you share ideas, and the people that are interested in you because there's something they can get from you. And that's, you know, that's just being utterly candid in terms of how it goes. I mean, I'm so grateful for all of the experiences that I've had, because I've learned so much about the work along the way. But it can be upsetting when when you're sort of working on something maybe for some time, and then you find out, oh, we're not on the same page. And it's ultimately it's a learning experience, and it's important to have that, because it helps you to then build the collaborations where, and ultimately to ask the questions of your collaborators that, you know, are going to ensure that you're all working together, you know, for the same purpose. But it does take time, and for me, I'm somebody who perhaps only learns through doing. Maybe that's why that's gone that way. But you know, certainly the people that I'm working with now are, you know, like the way in which they understand the writing process and support me, and, you know, just completely are on my side in terms of, you know, making sure like that I'm writing my vision of it, and I'm not, you know, kind of compromising any of that. I feel incredibly lucky at the moment that, you know, my producers are the way that they are with me, because but I think that's also because one of them has been a writer. Do you know what I mean? She's been a writer, she's been a director, do you know what I mean? So she's got a clear sense of what that means, and I think that also helps. If you find somebody who you know, has got all those different points of engagement with the craft, they tend to be a bit more understanding of that, and also what their current other work is. You know, they shouldn't just be just only doing the one thing. If they're producing, they should have a few. I would want them to have a few different things going on, just for the fact that, you know, it puts so much pressure on you as a writer if they're just focusing on what you know, when your next draft is coming from.
Right.
You know, but that's, again, it's subjective. It's all about, you know, but yeah.
Thank
Just
you. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, just be prepared for any eventuality. That's the only thing.
Yeah.
So,
Got it.
crazy old world.
Do we have any other questions?
Yeah.
Well, hello, Mark. Go ahead.
Just wanted. You put the slide up about covers, film covers, and
Yeah.
it's I've really noticed in books.
Yeah.
I'm just so sick of the same. You know, they've become so standard and standardized. I get really what you were saying about, you know, you don't want to give a false impression of what your film's about by presenting the wrong image. But I'm also really frustrated that a lot of the things, they're just designed in the same way, because there's that grip of those.
Yeah. It just goes into a spreadsheet. It literally, it will just go into a spreadsheet in terms of what territories will want that kind of film, and how many screenings is that kind of film likely to have each week, and then they can project what sort of return it will have, and it's, you know, what the demographics are and what areas, you know, of the country it will go to. I mean, it's there's one of the examples I love to show, just because it's really depressing, is a film called Kronos. So Kronos is a horror film that's by Guillermo del Toro, which is about there's a device in this film that has vampiric qualities, and it will give eternal life, but it will bite into the skin and suck some blood out, but then it will give eternal life. And this main character in it is this old guy who runs an antique store, and his little granddaughter, and this item arrives by chance in his antique store, and then there are like the bad guys who are after it as well, blah blah blah. Anyway, the poster for Kronos is a beautiful woman, like stretched out, she's got no top on, and this gold thing attached to her breast, and she is not in the film. Did you just hear vampire and go hot woman with her top off and stick it on her? I mean, you're just like, wow, really? It's extraordinary. It's like, where did that come from? She's not in it. There's no topless ladies in this film. It's the granddad and his little granddaughter. And it just, to me, was like a really strong example of where the sales agents haven't necessarily seen the film. You know, we may well think that, you know, everyone's going to pay full attention to every single bit of the script, that, you know, the people working on the film hopefully will do, but not everyone involved with the distribution will do. And I think this is a key problem that has been identified with what's going on with the industry this year, is that actually it's a responsibility of both the sales agents and the distributors to get a little bit more imaginative about how they're reaching audiences, because that's going to be how the industry survives. Is they've got to.
I've got two. Oh, go on, Mark.
Sorry, just strikes me that on purely on the cover, there's just such a lack of creativity. The film itself might be, you know, might have a lot of creativity in it, but you're just seeing the same images, and that's obviously because films that haven't got that image are not getting the right coverage, or not getting pushed through because they're not.
But it is this thing of how we market, you know, a film with such complexity and subtlety, without giving it away, and without, do you know what I mean? And it's got to be impactful. It has to sort of be like, oh yeah, I want to see that. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it's interesting, for example, like all Tom Cruise films, all of them just have his face on the poster. That's always the poster for a Tom Cruise movie. It's just
one hell of a face, though. One hell of a face.
Okay.
I've got a couple of short little stories relevant to this. There's a film a few years ago now released by a company called Momentum, and they're no longer with us now. And they released a film called Lebanon. And so at this talk by the head of distribution, he was telling me that there's lots of us in the audience, and he was very open. He was saying, yeah, we lost loads of money on nobody came to see it in cinemas. So the film itself is 4 blokes in a tank, and the whole film is in the tank. So when the DVD came out, they were like, oh God, what are we going to do? We have to make this more exciting. So the cover was like this tank with all this explosion, everything going around. And if you've got like 5 minutes to spare, go onto Amazon, because they sold it for £5 in Sainsbury's supermarkets. And it sold like 100,000 copies. So everything was all right. They got back all the losses. But there were all these hilarious Danny Dyer types who giving film, the reviews saying, what is this film? It's just 4 blokes in a tank. It's just like, rubbish. So yeah. And I saw Jaws, which I enjoy Jaws on your kind of tone and genre of films. Jaws is the reason we have blockbusters. Somebody was telling me recently because. Oh, go on. Or is it before Jaws?
No, it's Star Wars' fault.
Because I think it's Jaws. Yes, it's because the opening weekends in LA and New York, there were so many people lining up on the street. That people will go into the street itself. So it would look from above.
Yeah.
It looks like the blocks are busting.
No, the reason it's Star Wars' fault, the whole blockbuster thing, is because it was the first films that had merchandise. So
George Lucas had all the rights, actually. I remember. They weren't interested
it was the first time they started to do like the dolls and the posters and the lunch boxes, and so then because they realised it didn't just depend on the film, there was all of these other streams of money they could get. That's where that blockbuster franchise thing began to roll from. So whereas before, when the studio system fell apart at the end of the 60s, essentially like the heads of the studio were like, well, why aren't people going to see like the musicals anymore and the disaster movies? Why aren't they doing this? And they literally didn't know what people wanted, and they were terrified. So they genuinely went to film schools and just gave money to film students who happened to be Martin Scorsese and Coppola and George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, and they were like, just come back with something. And so they would go and then come back with something, and then they were like, okay, we'll just stick that out, see what people think, and then they started to do well. So, and then we had Star Wars, and they were like, ooh, money coming from toys, money coming from things that aren't films, money coming from cheap plastic things that we can just get made somewhere else and just ship it around. And then that's where we've got this kind of dependence on the superhero and franchise movies.
They did have to do that a couple of times, because after Easy Rider, they gave 5 people, I think 5 directors $1 million, because it made so much money. 5 directors $1 million each, and they were too artistic. I think Dennis Hopper went to South America.
They were a bit mad to give Dennis Hopper £1 million and send him off around America, getting absolutely bombed off his head. But
yeah. Does anybody else have any questions? Wow.
Just quickly. It's okay. I don't know if you've spoken about it before at the beginning when I didn't hear the sound. Talent surgeries that you mentioned here, James. Can you explain a little bit?
Yeah, we've revamped it from our first sessions. It's essentially where I put it in the chat. So if you send me an email at info@violetpictures.co.uk, you can apply for like between half an hour and an hour to spend with one of the panelists, and hopefully that will be Gabriella if I can convince her. And you can talk about scripts idea you have, or just some career advice, or if you want to know things about programming distribution. So it can be a mix of things, and that's we're supported by Screen South, so they're enabling that to happen. So I had 3 really good chats with George, who was part of the last sessions, and he was putting on some events in his area. So yeah, it can work really well. So yeah, we're calling it talent surgery. So I think we called it before 1-to-1, and it sounds a bit like you're getting self-help. So yeah, talent surgery. So see how that works this time. People may think, it still sounds weird. So yeah, but we'll try.
Could I ask a question?
I just think Fee had a question.
Yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead, Fee.
And
then we'll grab you, Kit, after.
Yeah, it won't take long, thanks. I just want to ask, when you hear about people saying, what is the theme of your film? What is your voice? How does that come through? I just want to get my head around. This is what you mean, Gabriella, when you say, think about what you want to say. Is that right? So it's what you want to say and leave the audience with. Is that theme? Because I'm getting really confused about, does theme come first or the story? Because I've written things but haven't quite wrapped it up to a story. It's more plot driven and action and lots of character, but I think I'm missing a theme and I don't quite know how to address that.
Yeah, I think the thing is that then when you think about what that theme would be, it comes into that question like self-interrogation, really. Why am I telling this? You know, that's the thing that's beneath the plot and beneath the action, is like, why is this important? Why have I got that character behaving this way? And it takes it then from the sort of superficial thing of just, you know, because it would look cool and it would be fun, into that kind of deeper section of actually what the you know, the significance of it is, and what, you know, the way in which it could be interpreted, because an audience will interpret stuff whether you want them to or not. You know, you can put, I don't know, let's say you can put my little funny screwdriver thing and, I don't know, my little machine thing together, and then you'll just like have an image of that and an image of that, and immediately you're going to start putting stories together, linking them, right? There's probably going to be like a killing thing. I don't know, that would be my first thing. I'd just be like, oh, there's some kind of cat killing thing going on here. Or it might be, oh, no, it's to do with, you know, fixing things, and perhaps this little cat needs a house. You know what I mean? We're going to have different interpretations of whatever it is that you put in front of us. Obviously, I've literally just picked these up from my desk. Don't ask me what I've got with these on my desk. I don't know why they're there. But you see an image, you're going to go, okay, right, I've got a weird screwdriver thing there, and then I'm going to put that there, and you're going to connect the two. Do you know what I mean? The trick is you need the audience to connect them the way that you want them to. And so if you don't know why you want them to connect those things in that way, they can have any number of different interpretations, and you're no longer in charge of what their perception is and what their reaction is going to be. So if you've got that grounding point of like, this is what the story is about, this is what I'm trying to actually communicate with it, then everything kind of has a bar that it can be referred back to. Do you know what I mean? So it's just interrogating it back. It's like, kind of, you know, it doesn't matter, ultimately it doesn't matter what your entry point is and how you start with it. You can start from any way you like, but if you've started from that sort of outside thing of stuff happening, then it's going, well, why is this interesting? And just asking it of yourself, why am I interested in this? You know, and just go, you know, like annoying 3-year-old, but why, and just to keep unpacking it.
Thanks.
Helpful.
Go ahead, Kit.
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question about so when you've got that draft, maybe you've even done as many as say 10 drafts or whatever. I feel like I still would need someone much more experienced than me to help me. Almost, what do you call it, like a script? Some people call themselves script doctors, but I suppose I'm just looking for someone to do very focused mentoring. And I wondered if is that something you do or like people do to like help with short film?
Yeah, there's loads of people that do stuff like that. I do it. Yeah, lots of people do it.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's places like Euroscript that do it. There's what's he called? Oh, what's he called? It's not called Script Doctor. There's a woman called Bang to Write, Lucy Hay. She does it. I'm trying to think what he's called now. There's another guy that does it. There's quite a lot of script consultants out there.
Right, right.
They'll all charge different amounts and things.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just according to people's schedules, and yeah.
Got you. So I suppose my question is that, like, what would, so right now there's two separate shorts that I've been working on as an idea, like kind of over there, while I've been doing other things for a while now. And what do you find when you do that? Like, what do you find is best that the writer brings to you? Is it like their third draft, their 10th draft, or do you think it's good to talk like before they've even started, or does it just kind of?
The thing is, I've spoken to people at all points in it, because obviously I'm not either teaching people, from like literally no experience whatsoever, and they're developing ideas from scratch. And I've spoken to people when they've been several drafts into a feature script that's got funding. Do you know what I mean? So it's
yeah.
I mean, for me, the only thing I'd say is that I always interested, especially if it's to kind of streamline the process. And if I'm not, if you're literally not a student in my class, then I would always want the whole story. I'd want to know where your end is, because you can't tell, as I say, you can't tell what it's about until you know what the end is, and it can go anywhere. That's the beauty of film. You can go anywhere, but there's so many variables of that if I don't have the whole story, then I'm like, I don't know what to say to you. You know what I mean?
Got you.
That's how I'm going to understand what it's about, is having the whole thing. And I can't.
Then it can be refined from that point. Yeah. Okay.
Because you can't evaluate the significance of what else is in it unless you know what the whole thing is. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And there's certain questions I can't ask you about it, about what's your intention with that bit, or does that, when that character does that, are you trying to get me to feel like this? Do you know what I mean? Like, I can't evaluate anything if it doesn't have an ending, because anything else could happen.
That's fantastic. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Okay.
If nobody has any final questions, we're coming up to the 2-hour mark. So if anybody's, I'll do my little wrap up, and if you can think of a final question, get in there before we cut off. But just to say thank you very much to Gabriella for your time.
Pleasure.
That was great, and
thank you.
Nice to spend time with you and spend time with.
Useful.
Oh, absolutely. So I just want to invite you to our next masterclass session, which is this time next Monday, with Andrew Mackey. So Andrew Mackey is the CEO and founder of Transmission Films, based in Sydney, in Australia. So he's going to go through an example of the film he's released, and then we'll talk about kind of how the world is changing, touching on things that Gabriella talks about, with how distributors need to reach new audiences. And he's really honest and straightforward. And I had a chat with him a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about how they've got 450 films, and some are great, some are not great, some are and what he sees for the future. And he also is one of the co-founder of Seesaw Films. And Seesaw Films is Ian Canning, who's a British producer who produced King's Speech, Lion. So he'll be talking about his role as an exec producer, what's involved in that, how some projects he'll be quite involved in it, and some he'll be more hands-off. So he'll talk through that process as well. So you can sign up for it on the same page you sign up for this. So that's next week. It's going to be at 9 a.m. because to help with the time difference in Sydney. So yes, if you can join that. And then the following week, we're back, not with Gabriella, but we'll be back talking about script feedback and actors roundtables. Actually, before you shoot anything at all, you can hear what your dialogue sounds and get input from actors. So that'll be a session, that'll be session led, like Gabriella's done today. So again, details on the same page as where you signed up for this. So yeah, great. Well, thank you ever so much everybody for joining. If you've got any further questions and you're a bit shy, sometimes I am in these things, send them to me, and sometimes they're not page and page, I'll send them to Gabriella, and she's got time, she'll answer. But thank you to everybody we didn't speak to as well, Gabrielle and Dean, Barbara, who I know well from Screen South, and Niami. Wheeler, thank you for joining as well, and thank you for everybody else for joining. So yes, enjoy
much.
the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any last questions
Really good.
before we go? Any last question? No, that's it. Last chance.
Oh, hi. Sorry.
We've got one. Great. Go ahead.
I'm wondering, I always struggle with creating characters that are interesting, because I feel like my worst nightmare is to create characters that have no personality. So I was just wondering, what's your take on that, on like what I can do?
Yeah, it's really hard, character development, and I think that my advice really is you'll find often, you know, people sort of give us a starting point in lectures, things like, you know, I don't know what they're, you'll see things like, you know, people talking about like hair color and height and things like that. Like no, what do they, you know, don't worry about anything that's sort of necessarily to do with how they look, or, you know, that sort of superficial stuff. For me, it's always about how they are, how they feel about certain things, what's driving them, what do they, crucially with the character, it's what do they want and why do they want it, because that's going to be in whatever story you're writing, they're going to have some form of motivation that's going to keep that momentum through the story. And that may well change as the story develops, because their priorities might change. But if we know why they want something as well and what that's based on, that's going to give us a sense of their values and their priorities. So if you look, for example, at something like The Godfather, and you've got the character of Michael running through that, what does he want? Ultimately, he wants his family to be proud of him. And the way in which that happens obviously changes throughout the film and takes him from being, you know, this upstanding, moral, military person to being the head of the criminal mafia organization. But what he wants and why he wants it remain consistent throughout. It's just the way in which that you know is depicted and materializes changes as his character journey evolves. So having a sense of their underlying driving motivations and the reasons for those. And again, this constant interrogation of that is really important, and reminding yourself that, as I say, the feeling happens before before the character does something. The feeling happens before they say something or before they do something, and so that's going to drive the way in which they actually enact, you know, whatever is going to happen in the story. And you can decide how they're going to physically respond to something or verbally respond to something based on how they're feeling. So a lot of it is actually is a lot of sort of like thinking time and trying to get a sense of, I don't know, the kind of psychological insights to them. That's one of the things I try and spend a lot of time doing with my characters, is getting as much into their heads as possible, and often putting them into situations that aren't in your script can be helpful. So just kind of almost going on a day out with them, like a normal day out with them in your mind, seeing how they respond in, I don't know, a walk in the park, or a situation in the supermarket that's irritating, or how does your character deal with that? And imagining them in different scenarios that don't have a direct impact on, as I say, on the way your plot's going to go, but that are going to allow you to see them in different situations.
I was just going to jump in. I've just written a short story, and one of the things I started to do was write some of the history of the main character. Not necessarily to be put in. It did get put in eventually, but it just helped me get a sense of, well, hang on a minute, where's this guy from?
Yeah.
You know, it just helped to fill it out, even though it didn't make it in. Well, it has made it into the main script now, but originally it wasn't supposed to. Yeah. So I thought that was quite.
I mean, character work is very much that sort of stuff where what you'll actually see, perhaps in the film, is really the tip of the iceberg, but that beneath that there's so much understanding of who they are and what's going on, you know, emotionally, psychologically for them. I mean, Moonlight, it's, you know, which is one of the best films of this century, is a brilliant example of that. You've got a character who says very little, who's, you know, very internalized in all of his emotions, but by the way that he's depicted in the film, you can almost read his mind, because you can get a sense of his complexity through how he's behaved. So there's a huge amount of character development that's gone on there that fills in all of that detail of what we understand about him as audience members, and that's been very specific. I think, again, we can get too generalized with the way in which somebody might deal with a certain situation, and it's important to think, well, how does my character deal with that, and why would they behave in that situation? And it is definitely, for me, like the most complex part of any screenwriting is the character development, but it's often where the whole thing kind of actually lives or dies, because it's very satisfying to add plot to stuff. You can see things move and change on the page, and it feels quite, oh, I'm you know, I'm getting somewhere with this, but actually it can still feel quite superficial. And if you take it back to character and think about, you know, what's driving it, what's beneath that, you know, in terms of motivation and intention, psychology, then that's going to really enliven it and enrich it. So I would say don't feel like you've got to have it all there, you know, at the tip of your fingertips, because you won't have. You've literally got to get to know them, and it takes time.
Gabriella, can I say something very quickly?
Yeah. I just wanted to check with Neve if that's okay for her.
Sorry, just very quick. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you so much. Yeah, for everything that everyone.
Was that sort of helpful? It's an answer.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Oh, brilliant.
No, you're welcome. You're welcome. Lisa, sorry.
Just so quickly, because I realize that, yes, I write, but then I think I'm avoiding the painful part, and I'm avoiding something painful. So you don't go to the characters that cause you... I
mean, you have to at some point. You have to. It's hard. It's horrible. I mean, I've definitely sat writing scripts and been bawling my eyes out. It's horrible. You know, I mean, I wrote one screenplay, like full screenplay. I gave it to a friend of mine to read, who's also does script editing, and he was like, "Yeah, you can't give this character a hard time, can you, Gab?" And I was like, "No." He was like, "It's not going to work then, is it?" I was like, "No." I mean, you have to. You just have to. It's horrible. It's heartbreaking. You know, you've got to get in there, especially when if you're working on things that are really upsetting, you know, in terms of the material. It's really tough, and you've got to be very gentle with yourself. You know, I mean, I wrote one scene that was really, really, really upsetting to write, because it was an abuse scene. And I was in bits. I couldn't go back for, you know, a long time, like, you know, a good few days. Really, really hard. That's normal, though. You know, we're a lot of us that are writers are oversensitive people that walk around like we're an open wound anyway. Do you know what I mean? So you've just got to be mindful of that and protect yourself and do some self-care and balance it out with other stuff. You know, it's not about, you know, you can't avoid it, because the script's going to suffer without it, and you're not actually doing justice to the character if you avoid it. But you've just got to protect yourself in terms of, you know, this is why I haven't written very much at all this year, because, to be honest, I need to be, you know, I'm a single person, I live by myself, I need to feel safe in order to write. So guess what? I've felt all that safe this year. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, I'm not going to go into like somebody's really vulnerable, you know, like anxiety-ridden self and then come back into the apocalypse. Do you know what I mean? It's like, so, you know, it's fine. It, like, you know, protect yourself. I mean, what I've been doing instead, because I haven't found I've been able to do that, is just a lot more research, you know. So there's still ways to develop the work without exposing yourself, but it is hard, and it does hurt sometimes. That's normal, and actually that's good. It should.
Great, thank you.
Okay, we're 10 minutes over. I'm going to call it there then. But so thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Gabriella, again.
Thank you, everyone.
And hopefully see you all again soon on next sessions, and be safe. And yes, we've got lots of films to watch now. I must go and watch Mudhound. I think